This is a Fox News Alert. Tonight on the record, the threat of ISIS is growing, and just what you feared, America is losing that battle. A brand new report from the House Homeland Security Committee showing the United States is failing to stop American fighters from fleeing to Syria to join ISIS and wage violent jihad. A shocking 250 Americans have tried to join ISIS, but even more alarming, only 28 have been stopped before they leave the United States. Committee Chair Congressman Michael McCaul warning of this dangerous situation.
The findings indicate that number one, the threat is getting worse, not better. We are losing in this struggle to keep Americans from the battlefield because many are still going to the region and coming back. And I think most importantly that we lack a national strategy to deal with this problem.
Of course, we must stop this trend, but how? Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger goes on the record. Good evening, sir.
Hey, Greta, thanks for having me.
First, the news that 250 Americans plus joining ISIS or terrorist groups around the nation, around the world. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, look, it's very dangerous. Not just are we supplying fighters to basically our chief enemy, ISIS. These folks can come home. They can come back, some cases with clean passports, come back through Turkey. We have no idea. And they've been radicalized. But here's the situation. We have to show how we can stop these folks. They're not joining ISIS to go and die for ISIS. They're joining to go and fight for ISIS. So I think we have to make it clear that you will die if you join ISIS. Now, how do you do that? I think we have to
die. That's the problem. I mean, that's sort of the whole jihad idea. You're a hero if you die. I mean, once you get to wherever it is that it's supposed to be so splendid.
I think once you're radicalized, that's true. I think once you're radicalized, you do want to die. But early on, people, look, they see, guys going around, shooting up villages, doing it for their so-called religion, and it's enough to sell them on this. When they get radicalized, then they say, hey, I want to be a martyr. We have to stop them before that. And how do we stop them? You show that we're dealing huge blows, not just in numbers, but in territory to ISIS. You show that it's likely they're going to be killed if they join ISIS. And unfortunately, they show terrible pictures of beheadings and violence. I think it's important for us to show the violence they're perpetrating on the people of Syria and Iraq, and also to show, frankly, the violence that's visited upon them if they face the coalition. But there's no doubt, too, the president needs to have a strategy to win, and his strategy right now is at an utter stalemate.
But the message I suspect that's being sent out there, a lot of social media, even in the news. I mean, we report tonight that it seems that ISIS is, that we're not winning the battle against ISIS. I mean, it looks like ISIS is the victor. I mean, that's part of the attraction. It's the religious fervor, but it's part of the attraction that these people are the ones that are winning. We're losing the PR war enormously. We're losing on the battlefield. We're losing in the PR war.
You know the best way to win the PR war? Not just to put out good PR, you can't manufacture good PR, but to actually have good public relations, and you do that by defeating ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Raqqa, for instance, in Syria. How come we're not dealing major blows to their headquarters in Syria? How come we still have a stalemate? That's a question for the president. The president is more interested, I believe, in maintaining the status quo until he's out of office, because I think ultimately it means that he's going to have to put some level of boots on the ground or special forces. And I think we all know this. He's simply unwilling to do that. He does not want to expand a war that he's promised to end. And, unfortunately, I think in this case, a political promise is more important than actually defeating this cancer. We can bomb them all we want, and we should, but to actually deal a real blow, it's probably going to take much more commitment on our end.
What are your Democratic colleagues across the aisle on Capitol Hill saying when they hear the reports, of more Americans joining ISIS and that we're losing on the battlefield?
Well, I think they're concerned. I mean, look, they're happy when the news isn't about ISIS because it doesn't look good on them. It doesn't look good on the president. They're concerned. But again, it's going to take you calling out the president of the United States to say you're going to have to step up your game. And I know people are scared to death of the term boots on the ground. We're not talking about 300,000 American troops, but we are probably talking about an increased amount of special forces, similar to what we did to win in the surge in Iraq. You capture people, you get their cell phone, find out 10 people they were talking to, capture or kill those 10 people, and unravel the network. But it's going to take American capability, and unfortunately the president's not willing to do that.
Congressman, thank you, sir.
You bet. Thanks.
As leaders in Washington try to battle terror, world leaders are gathered here in New York City at the United Nations General Assembly. And today, President Obama convened a summit aimed at fighting violent extremism. More than 100 nations leaders attended the summit. Fox News White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live at the United Nations here in New York City. Kevin.
Greta, good evening to you. Perfectly timed, right? Especially when you consider all the unrest that is going on right now in Syria. The president did today chair a summit here at the UN, and he told leaders that there's no doubt in his mind, Greta, that Bashar al-Assad has got to be removed from power immediately before he kills even more of his countrymen. The president went on to say that the U.S. would be willing to work with the Iranians and even the Russians to make sure that that got finished and make sure that Assad was eventually removed from power. Now, earlier in the day, the president spoke with Cuba's president, Raul Castro, the two men speaking about reparations and, of course, the prison at Guantanamo Bay. Cuba would like reparations, and they want that prison not only closed, they want the land returned to them. The president would like to close the prison, but he would go no farther than that. But clearly the big story today, Greta, is Russia, its ability to exert not only its presence and its power, but now its influence is growing both in Syria and the broader Middle East. Greta.
Kevin, the conversation about reparations, Cuba wants reparations. Was any conversation about the property taken from Cuban Americans by Cuba, that maybe they want their property back?
Thank you for saying that. Look, I lived in Miami, and I can tell you, you talk to Cuban nationals, you talk to Cuban Americans, and that's the very first thing they say. What about the billions of dollars of property, businesses, money, resources that were stolen by the regime? They don't talk about that. And that's why I think it's pretty fair to say that the administration here has no interest in having a dialogue about reparations, although they are interested in closing the prison, specifically just the prison at Guantanamo Bay.
Kevin, thank you. President Obama is calling on other nations to step up and join the fight to destroy ISIS and other terror groups around the world. British Prime Minister David Cameron boldly stated, "We need to recognize our enemy for what it is, radical Islamic terror."
I believe what we have here today is the emergence of a global movement that is united by the mission of degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL.
Every religion has its extremists, but we have to be frank that the biggest problem we have today is the Islamist extremist violence that has given birth to ISIL, to Al-Shabaab, to Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and so many other groups. Now, these people claim to act in the name of the Islamic religion. They don't. I can say they don't. I can say they don't over and over again. You can say they don't, but there's nothing more powerful than what, for instance, the King of Jordan has just said when Muslim leaders and Muslim countries reclaim their religion and explain why what these people are saying is not Islam, it is a perversion of Islam.
Former United States Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, goes on the record. Good evening, Ambassador, and can you compare and contrast both President Obama and Prime Minister David Cameron as they address this issue of terrorism?
Well, I think Prime Minister Cameron has a more realistic view of what might be possible. But honestly, this entire summit today, I think, was kind of beside the point. Nothing is going to happen here at the United Nations. The United Nations has never been effective in dealing with international terrorism, and nothing that any of the leaders said today really changes that. I think we're pretty much where we were at the end of yesterday. Putin has a strategy, a controversial one not in American interest, but that's the one that's on the table now, frankly, and I think the Europeans are beginning to respond to it.
Ambassador, President Obama says there's no doubt President Assad of Syria must be removed from power. Exactly, take that one step further. What is he talking about? How is that going to be done? And haven't we heard that one before?
Well, we've heard it ever since the Syrian civil war broke out, and he's done effectively nothing to accomplish that objective. He also said today, as you noted earlier, that he'd be willing to work with Russia and Iran to ease Assad out of power. And he said that for 4 years, too.
But wait a second,
there's
stop
one
for a second.
problem with that analysis,
and
that is that Iran and Russia have no intention of easing Assad out of power.
That was exactly what I was going to say. How is that going to happen? Because Vladimir Putin wants Assad to stay in power. So exactly how, if we're all working together, we seem to have very different goals. How do you work together when you have different goals?
Well, we're not going to work together, and the president's going to fail again in his estimation about what's going to happen to Assad. You know, there was a very telling statement by Josh Earnest a couple of days ago when asked how the president explained the failure of $40 to $50 million of training of the so-called moderate Syrian opposition. And Josh Earnest, in a statement that really didn't get much attention, said, well, you know, the president was really never in favor of that, and the collapse, the embarrassing failure of that program proved he was right. I mean, these people still don't know what their policy is.
Is it a big deal that Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Russia, Vladimir Putin, had this sort of joint intelligence sharing agreement? Is that a big deal, and the fact that we're left out of it, or is it not a big deal?
No, it's a big deal, and I think it really reflects part of a larger Russian strategy to challenge the United States for dominance in the Middle East. The axis that already existed between Iran, the Baghdad government, which really only covers the Shia parts of Iraq, dominated by the mullahs in Tehran, Syria, Hezbollah, and Lebanon, is the pre-existing Iranian axis, with which Russia is now joined even more clearly because of the construction of the air base at Latakia. This is the Entente or alliance, whatever you want to call it, that's now bidding for dominance in the region.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And